Hi guys, welcome to this tactical video. This one is for the second Forge World unit for Adeptus Sororitas. It's also one of the flyers out of 3 of them which we can take. And of course we can't usually take flyers in the Codex. This is the Avenger Strike Fighter, probably the most infamous of the lot. Generally speaking, if you've ever seen a Sisters flyer, people are running this one. So what is the Avenger Strike Fighter? Okay, well first off, the rules can be found in Imperial Armour Aeronautica, again from Forge World. It is a 150 point base flyer. It has Ballistic Seal 3, which is worse than most of the things, but that's because it can also be taken for Imperial Guard, kind of fluffy there. It's got front armour 12, all the other armor values are 10. It's got 2 hull points. It's got special ruse supersonic, strafing run, which is nice, and of course deep strike. So yeah, that's basically it. The war gear, it has some interesting weapons. The straightforward one is the wing mounted las cannons. Bear in mind, because they're wing mounted, you get 2 of these by the way. It means your arc of fire is very small. You can only really fire at the things you're actually shooting at straight. So bear that in mind. And again, you get a hull-mounted Avenger bolt cannon. Now, for those who don't know, an Avenger bolt cannon is very nice. It's strength 6 AP 3, and it fires 7 shots at 36-inch range. So that's very nice. As you can probably guess, that's really good at killing Space Marine infantry, since you really want to use. And of course, with the strafing run rules, you're getting that +1 ballistic skill, so it's nice to have. It also has a heavy stubber, but this is something called a defensive one. It's a special rule for this. Basically, it has a firing arc at the back, and it's Skyfire. Now, it's not entirely clear, but it seems like the heavy stubber can only ever fire Skyfire and cannot actually shoot ground targets without snap firing, unless of course they're a skimmer or a jet bike. So not so useful. But then again, it's just a heavy stubber, so meh. It's kind of strange, and it's not going to be much use against the majority of flies you see there. But then again, maybe here and there it may be useful. I kind of feel like the heavy stubber is a good indicator for this flyer's best role, and for me, the best thing this flyer has going for it is it's really good at killing flying monstrous creatures. For instance, Tyrannid Hive Tyrants, you know, Chaos Demon Princess, that kind of thing. Basically, the kind of monsters you see flying around with a 3-up armor save, this thing is going to tear them apart. And that's kind of where its strengths lie. Other than that, I mean, okay, you'd be hitting on Ballistic Seal 3, but it's still got enough firepower to actually force those grounding checks, that kind of thing, take them out. You know, even if they jink, you know, you're limiting the incoming fire at least. And, you know, you're putting out enough shots that you're probably going to do enough to cause some trouble to these things. So it's really good at killing that kind of unit. Okay, now, otherwise it's very support fire orientated. So even though it is a heavy support slot, it kind of fills a similar role to Heavy Bolter Retributors and of course the Exorcist, in that it provides long range firepower, and you know, it's not killy so much itself. I mean, it can blow up vehicles. It's got 2 las cannons. You got a decent chance there. You know, you're gonna kill Marines if they're not in cover or some other defenses. And honestly, if you manage to get that to happen, then good. Difficult to kind of engineer unless your opponent makes a mistake, but you can do it. But yeah, generally speaking, this thing kind of wants to fly around the battlefield, picking on opportune targets and just doing as much damage to them as possible. And its variety in weapons allow it to basically engage different targets. So it's like the Exorcist. There's always something you can be shooting this at, and as such, it fills a similar role. Now, of course, it's a lot weaker than an Exorcist because it's only got those 2 hull points. It's got a very, very big profile on the side and rear, and of course it's armor 10 on those. So yeah, you're gonna take a lot of hit fire. But of course, if you're careful with it, if you like run it around the sides, very careful on its positioning, that kind of thing, you can try and keep that front armor 12 against most of the things you'll be facing, and that should protect you fairly well to at least do some damage. So, you know, it's not too bad. With the supersonic, what you really want to be doing is getting this moving as fast as possible, keep it moving, try and keep it at extreme distance from the enemies and just firing at the furthest distance it can, where it can still fire its weapons, because then you're limiting the return fire, and of course it's harder for them to get on the side and rear sides. So it's kind of strange that the Avenger Strike Fighter, if anything, has more defensive power the later in the game it arrives, but of course you don't really want this vehicle staying off the board for that long, because it's 150 points. You're mainly paying for the firepower, or at least the potential firepower that it has. Okay, so there are several upgrades you can take, a variety of missiles, autocannons, missile launchers and stuff. The main thing I really want to talk about here, because there's so many upgrades, is there's a few builds you can go for, one of which is 2 multi-lasers. Depending on your opponent, this is more strength 6 shooting, same range as the bolt cannon, so it kind of meshes well with that. The benefit here is that you'd be putting out 13 strength 6 shots per phase, to be honest, at the same distance. So that's a lot of strength 6, and you know that can do a number on light vehicles. It can do a number on infantry of all sorts, especially light infantry. For instance, you fire that kind of thing into a sister's unit, for instance, and that's going to do some damage. Now, of course, you don't get the AP free on those, but honestly, again, with the cover, with invulnerable saves, with all this kind of thing floating around, you're not going to get that as much anyway. So the main drawback of the multi-lasers is that it's 30 points for that upgrade, which is a little bit on the pricey side, but there you go. You can also get 2 autocannons for the same kind of thing. If you are keeping this as a monstrous creature hunting vehicle, for instance, if you play against Tyranids or Chaos or anything like that, maybe Eldar as well, if you play against them regularly, I would seriously consider making it a dedicated monstrous creature hunting unit, especially because that's something sisters don't really have particularly. Then this can fill that role pretty well, so the autocannons could be beneficial there, and of course you get to stay at further range, so you're limiting the return fire. So I think that's a good option, especially if you're hunting things out of the sky. Personally, even though it's more expensive, it's 40 points, I would actually consider taking the 2 missile launchers here. Normally I'm not a fan of the missile launchers, but because it's strength 8 AP free, it meshes well when you fire a crack grenade, of course. And of course it's Skyfire, so it goes really well at killing those monstrous creatures again when they're flying. And of course it's got more of a tank role. And this thing's fast enough to be able to get behind vehicles and hit rear armor or side armor, etc. And, you know, you get more of a fighting chance against vehicles as well. And if you're facing Horde, then, you know, you're still getting those blasts. So it's kind of that multi-role kind of thing. And again, normally I don't really like the multi-role thing, but I feel like here, if you are facing Tyranids in particular, the missile launchers is definitely the way to go here. So the last thing, really, the last weapon choice to be aware of is the tactical bombs. You can get 6 of these for 40 points. For those who don't know, tactical bomb is strength 6 AP 4. It's a 3-inch blast, and each bomb's 1 shot. So bombs are interesting. Bombs are like an extra attack you get, and basically whatever you fly over you can hit with a bomb. This is good. Bear in mind it's fairly expensive, and you have to be aware that if you don't use the bombs, then you're going to get hit. You've got a good chance of getting hit with only 2 hull points, then losing that upgrade, okay? The other problem with the bombs is because you have to fly over enemies to get the most out of them, you're kind of running that risk of being too close for the return fire, and of course, your plane's ass is basically facing them, so they've got that rear armor 10 to shoot at. kind of leaves you a bit vulnerable. Now again, if you can find the opportune targets, if you can pick on the stragglers and that kind of thing, then this is really useful. But I would be wary to do this, especially in higher point games, because the space in which you'll have to move around will be very constricted. Chances are you'll end up running over someone, and remember, the base of a flyer is actually pretty big, so you've got to find space to put that and avoid things and, you know, bomb things. But again, supersonic really helps you out here because it gives you that extra speed, so you've got a very good chance of flying over and stuff. So if you want to run it that way, if you're facing a lot of horde, you could do a lot worse than take the bombs. I would personally say this, try it both ways. Whether or not they're worth taking is very much up to you and what you want out of it. Personally, I wouldn't bother at the moment unless things happen to change. I would probably go with either the missile launchers or the multi-lasers, depending on what I wanted it for. And honestly, it's probably more likely the multi-lasers, because it meshes pretty well and, you know, you're shooting things. And I would use it as a support fire role anyway. Okay, so the last main strength of the Avenger, other than the fact it's a flyer, so, you know, pretty good if the opponent has nothing to deal with it, is that it's got the deep strike special rule. Okay, most flyers in the game actually used to have this, and it was basically FAQ'd out during 6th edition, and after that it never came back. So the fact it's still got deep strike is actually really good. Now, bearing in mind, if you deep strike this thing, you know, it's got a big footprint, and you've got to be careful about what you do, or you've got a good chance of mishapping. But, you know, deep strike is still a relatively safe thing to do in this day and age, and because it can deep strike, it means you can get this behind high value targets, you can get this behind other flyers, you can get this in some very, very good places, especially if you have something to you know, negate the scatter. For instance, if you've got allies with locator beacons and that kind of thing, then pairing this up with that is a very, very effective way of getting it in. Of course, you'd need some kind of foresight or prescience on you to be able to decide where that locator beacon needs to be, but, you know, there's enough systems in the game now to avoid that. So if you really want to deep strike this thing, you know, you can build towards that kind of thing, or if not, then, you know, it's a good tool to get the drop on something. Bear in mind, that's probably a trick that's only going to work a couple of times at best against each opponent, so, you know, maybe don't rely on it too heavily. However, you know, it's a decent flyer in its own right, with enough firepower to make it a target, and that's something the Avenger can do. So perhaps there's no opportune targets on the board. One thing you can do with this is at least just fly around the outskirts, make it a nuisance, make it a potential threat. Something else the enemy kind of has to bear in mind as it's flying around, and as soon as the target presents itself, flies out, shoots at it with everything it's got, flies past, that kind of thing. You know, if you make this thing more like an annoying insect, people are going to want to kill it, and, you know, if they're shooting at the flyer, then they're not shooting at your other units, and, you know, if you can get into that kind of situation, then you're pretty good. So I think the key to using the Avenger Strike Fighter is basically, imagine you're the pilot. You are constantly seeking for those opportune targets. For instance, characters it can kill with its Vulcan cannon, you know, units out in the open, that kind of thing that can really damage. Rear armor of vehicle targets, walkers, monstrous creatures that are on their own, you know, warlords who's just stepped out of a unit, that kind of thing. This thing flies over there and shoots everything into him. You know, it's going to do some damage, and you know, it's not that expensive considering what you get for it. So it's definitely a possible. Just remember though that, you know, this is a big vehicle. The model itself is actually pretty big, and it's very vulnerable on the sides and the back. So beware that, basically, or this thing won't last too long. Now, having said all this, I personally don't think that flies really add too much to the system of battle. If you were going to take this, it's I would say take it because you just want to play around with it. You just want that security against flying monstrous creatures in particular, which can be a hassle for sisters, although we can still deal with it in other ways. Straight out the codex box, so to speak, I'd say Sisters of Battle are better at dealing with flying vehicles than they are monstrous creatures. So this thing is pretty good at picking up the slack a little bit. But if you really want to go flyer heavy, you're probably better off taking allies such as Stormwing formations and what's that new fancy Space Marine one in the Tau campaign book. There's one in there which is particularly good for flyers, getting some Storm Talons in and that kind of thing. So yeah, if you want to go flyer heavy, allies are probably a better choice. But you know, if you just want something to help support your army and that kind of thing, you could do a lot worse. So that's basically it. If there's anything you can think to add, then of course comment below and let everyone know. And if you have any questions, then also let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, remember to click like and subscribe for more tactical videos soon and other videos in the near future. Thanks for watching. See you next time.